Alrighty, Cherub. So what we're going to talk about right now is form. In this class, there are 4 different ways that we're going to be looking at each work of art. Okay, AP wants you to be able to break down each work of art into these 4 categories: form, function, content, and context. And we're going to talk about each one of these things, but today we're going to look at what form is. Okay. So the basic building blocks of the universe are the elements, right? We've got the periodic table here. We've got the most basic way that you can break down the universe. And then these break down into smaller subatomic particles, but then they're no longer elements. Okay, so this is the basic building block of the universe. For art has basic building blocks too. And that's what the elements of art are. Okay? And this is what form is. This is how we identify form as defined by AP. Okay? So we're looking at line, shape, form, space, value, color, and texture. So you can break up any work of art and look at it through the lens of these items. Every single work of art is based off of these, and we're going to take a look and see what those are. Okay? So we're going to talk briefly. So line, shape, form, space, value, color, and texture. We want to take a look at this piece. Now, this is called The Raft of the Medusa by an artist named Jericho. Okay? As you look at it, what do you notice? Okay. Now, let's look at it in terms of line. Well, we actually do. He actually does give us some lines here. He gives us lines and lines and lines and lines and lines. Okay? And if you're looking at it, you can see, okay, all of these people, their faces are headed in this direction. And so we're all like, oh, looking up. What are they looking at? What are they seeing? So we follow their gaze and we follow their look. And so that's called a psychic line. Okay? Where it's not, or an implied line, where we're looking because they're looking. So we get this line of bodies that move up. And those lines also form shape, our next element. Okay? And so you get here this pyramid, but then you also get this second pyramid made out of these human bodies. And if you notice, those pyramids, those triangles, are not equilateral. All right, what they're doing is they're tilting, and so it gives us, they're both tilting and they're tilting away from each other, and so it creates this feeling, these two shapes of instability. And when you have a shape that does that, it creates this it feels unstable, and psychically or psychologically, it feels like it's going to fall. And it feels like, it makes us a little nervous because we're like, oh, that's not stable. Okay, and so the artist very purposefully does that. Now, if you take a look at the colors in here are very somber. We're getting some dark, dark, dark colors, especially right here in the middle, highlighted then with some lights on either side. But the sky is they're very earthy colors. Not brilliant blues, not brilliant greens. So you get the sense that this is like early morning or late in the evening. And then, so with just some pops of red. So it's a very serious composition, we can tell. Texture. We're getting the texture of the waves, of the rolling sky, the water against the smoothness of the bodies, and the roughness of the wood. All right. So how does that lead us to discover what this piece is about? Value is the light and the dark. So again, he's using the lights and the darks to like lead our eye kind of up and down. So what this picture is about is it's about a shipwreck that happened in the 19th century. And what's happening is that the people who the ship sank, and people had managed to, some of the survivors managed to cobble together some of the pieces in the while they're floating in the water, managed to cobble together their raft from like remains of the hull. And they stayed afloat for several weeks, and they were starving to death. And you can see that some of the bodies of the dead are still here, and we can tell now color-wise. If you look at some of the living, you can see how they're colored slightly different than the bodies of the dead, which have this kind of greenish cast to them. Green always means, if a human body is green, that means they're not doing so well. Okay. And this one person, this one figure who turns away from everyone else, he's already given up hope. But you can see what they're doing is they're waving, and they're trying to, and they're looking, and they're pointing, and they're straining. Oops, go back, to get the attention of something. And if you can look and see, there on the horizon is another ship. So they were eventually rescued, but they endured a lot to be able to survive, and not, there were not many survivors. All right. But the artist uses these things. He uses shape, he uses line, he uses color, he uses texture, he uses value to tell this story, to help tell the story and make it more exciting. All right. And that's what form does. That's what form does, is it helps tell a better visual story. Okay? So when you make a work of art, and when an artist has made a work of art, you've got to consider these things. All right? So shape is probably one of the most basic things that we've got. Again, shapes, we see shapes all over the place. We see shapes automatically, and they help compose, obviously, the composition. Now, there's two kinds of shapes, and there's geometric ones. Geometric shapes have these hard angles and straight lines, versus an organic shape that is round and curvy and feels kind of plant-like. All right? Geometric shapes, like the one on the left, they feel robotic. You can see the figure of this woman. This is a Cubist painting, and it's a figure of a woman, and she's playing a mandolin, and it feels robotic to us. She feels like a robot, and that's because geometric shapes feel man-made. Because if you look at the things that we make, buildings, tables, chairs, floors, these things are all made out of geometric shapes. Versus the things in nature, if you go walking in the woods, you're going to see that they're curvy and kind of freeform. So shapes that are organic, that are curvy and round, they feel to us like natural, that they occurred in nature rather than that they were made by humans. So go ahead, and when you're looking at those things, go ahead and look for geometric and organic shapes. Now, lines, again, are used to convey information. Okay, so on this soda can drawing up here, okay, this is called a contour line. It's just giving us the edges of the various planes, and that gives us plenty of information to determine what's happening. We get these soda cans. We know that they're Diet Cherry Coke, and they've been crushed. Okay, we know exactly what's happening here. But if we have a little bit more, if the lines are used more, like this drawing of Rembrandt, Okay? He uses line to create value. So it's not just an outline. He uses line to, on top of line, on top of line, on top of line, to describe the texture. Look at his hair. Okay? To describe the value where the light is. To describe all kinds of things. The roundness, to give it form, make it look three-dimensional. See how it looks more real than the soda cans? And while we understand what's happening in the soda cans, we're not going to be fooled and think like, oh, that's a photograph. And while we're not fooled by that here either, it still feels more real. Okay? So that's because he's using line in a much more subtle and a much more impressive way over here. Now again, these aren't, they're trying to do two different things. One's not better than the other. They're just trying to do two different things. And the other way to use line, like I said previously, is a psychic line. So your eye follows. It gets led by, it makes connections, it connects the dots, and is led further down. And edges help lead our eye around. A successful composition will have our eye move around and look at the whole thing. If we come back over here to Rembrandt, we see that he does that. He uses his lines to pull us down and then catches us with the neck, catches that with that value here, pulls us down and up, and we follow the curve of his face, and we wind up with his eyes, which is exactly where he wants us to end up. Okay, so this is really, really good use of line. Okay. Now texture. Texture adds visual interest to a work of art. Now there's different kinds of texture, obviously. There is actual texture and implied texture. Now, these are two images that are on a digital screen. So they're both implied texture. But if I have something like a water bottle here, this is actual texture. I can actually take this and you can hear it. Some works of art have paint very thickly applied, and they have actual texture, and you can go up and touch the surface of them and feel the bumps and the contours of the paint on the surface. So that's actual texture. And implied texture is something like this, where it looks like, oh, okay, I can feel mentally feel the roughness of the wood versus the smoothness of the silk, and the roughness of the ends of the garlic bulbs versus the smoothness of the skin, the paper of garlic. All right, so they're trying to evoke the different textures of the different objects here. And while if we close our eyes and rub our hands over the surface of the painting, it would all feel the same. Visually, they're trying to evoke, they're trying to imply different textures. So there's actual texture and implied texture. All right? Now value. Value is light or high value or low value, dark. Okay? Value helps lead us to a focal point. Value also helps to create mood. And while this house on the left feels kind of overgrown, we've got the wisteria growing up the sides of the building. The shutters are thrown open. I can't quite tell if there's like you can't tell if it kind of has a little bit of an overgrown or abandoned feel, but it feels cheery. And while if this was, because it feels cheery because it's bright. It's a high value, all right? Whereas this other one, this Sargent painting, it has a low value. It's dark, and so the mood shifts dramatically. While this could be an abandoned house, it's one that you discover in broad daylight. Whereas this, it's these four little girls, and they're standing around and they're playing. But the mood is very, very different because the value is so low. It's dark. So he wants us to see instantly, he wants us to see this girl who's just standing there. And then we see, because these two are the highest value. Okay? He He wants us to see them first. But then we get these four little girls here in this room. What are they doing? These two skulking in the shadows, like it standing next to, leaning against this giant Asian vase. Like, what are they doing? It feels mysterious. It feels foreboding. It feels because we don't know, because the mood has shifted. So a high value creates this mood of like, upbeat, happy, bright, whereas a low value creates this mood of careful, something's going down. Color. Now, color is super important, obviously, to any work of art, and it's the first thing that we notice. Colors are used in a bunch of different ways in art, and here's some of them. So this Van Gogh painting, they're complementary colors. This nightclub that he paints, he purposefully painted it to be ugly. So what he does is he has these colors that are opposite of each other. Complementary means opposite. Okay, so he's got these red walls and these green, all this green, different kinds of greens throughout the room to make your eyes go vibrate, go, whoa, that's hard to look at. Which is why, so for example, let's go to the next thing. Colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel are said to be complementary. So this is why, for example, Christmas, the colors, red ornaments against a green tree feels very like bright to us because those two colors are fighting against each other. And that's why sports teams often use complementary colors, yellow and purple, blue and orange, because those colors are opposite. And so if you're on a jersey, if you're wearing a jersey for a sports team, those colors are going to fight against each other and vibrate and pop, okay, and which is what you want in a sports team or a major holiday. Now, analogous colors are colors that sit next to each other on the color wheel, and they feel very different to us. They feel good. So this one, he takes oranges and yellows and greens, and if we take a look over here, we've got greens and yellow and oranges, and they all feel good together on the color wheel. So we got yellows and greens and blues. That feels nice. Blue, purple, red. Like, that just feels nice. Okay? Feels good. Because the colors are related to each other. They're not fighting against each other. A monochromatic picture is a picture that uses different kinds of one color. Uses tints and shades. Now, a tint is a color with white added to it. And a shade is a color with black added to it. So this here is a shade of yellow. And this is a tint of yellow. Now sometimes those tints and shades have actual names. The tint of red is pink. The shade of red is maroon. Tints and shades of yellow don't really have a name in English. But a monochromatic picture feels to us, it's kind of, it goes together because it's all related. It feels like, it feels very specific, like something, the artist is trying to say something. And we can tell that this is, it's like early, I feel like it's early morning, when the sun has just peaked over the mountains and now is like just bathing it in this golden light. Okay? So that's the feeling that he's evoking here with this picture. Now, warm and cool colors. Warm colors predominantly are red, orange, yellow, whereas cool are predominantly green, blue, purple. And again, they create different moods. Cools feel calming to us. Warm colors feel exciting to us. Okay? Now, one of the things that we didn't really talk about is space. Okay? Space gets used in a work of art as an illusion of depth, especially in 2D works of art. So if you see these things, they don't really feel like there's no, on the one on the right, there's no real depth created here. All right? There's no background. We're not meant, this is a drawing of an animal on rock. We're not really meant to find a setting for this picture. Now this one's a little bit better in the sense that it has a sense of space. Okay, we know that the tree is closer to us than the buildings, which are closer to us than these green trees, which are closer than the mountains. But the sense is that it's been ironed or it's been squished into. There's not this great sense of depth here. Okay, there's different ways that artists use space in a 2D work of art. So the first one is linear perspective. Okay, where we've got a horizon line right here. We've got this line to show us where our eye level is. Okay, if an object is below that eye line, that horizon line, then we're going to see the top of it. And if it's above it, if it's above that horizon line, we're going to see the bottom of it. So we can see the bottom of the clouds, but the top of the railroad. Make sense? And as we move, there's a point on that horizon line. It's called the vanishing point, and everything gets smaller as we get down to it. All right? So we've got a horizon line, and everything, as we get closer to that vanishing point, everything's going to get smaller and closer together. That's linear perspective, and that, to our brain, looks real. Okay? This was the Greeks and the Romans knew how to do this, and this is what made the Renaissance art look real, because they rediscovered how to do this. They figured this out again. And so they're able to, so it looks like you can reach your hand into that picture, or you could walk right in, because this is how our eyes see. Okay? School of Athens here, we get the sense that, oh yeah, this building is like we could just walk right into this picture. It feels real to us because it's using the linear perspective. Okay? Now there's another kind of perspective, and it's called aerial perspective. And if you look around the valley, especially right now, you'll see this in practice. Okay? So aerial perspective uses value to show depth. Linear perspective uses size. Aerial perspective uses value. So the idea with aerial perspective is that things, as they move further away from us, are going to appear lighter in value. Things that are closer to us are going to appear darker value. And the reason is because there's gunk in the air, there's stuff in the air, there's dust, there's particles, there's smoke, there's things in the air that obscure our vision. And so this happens naturally, that things that are further away from us appear lighter, whereas things closer to us appear a lower value. Does that make sense? That's aerial perspective. And a way also of creating the sense of space is vertical stacking. Okay? Overlapping. We can place pictures, things, objects higher up in a picture, and then we'll understand that to mean that they're further back. Now this is a little less convincing. It's a little less real looking than this, for example. Okay, so this is vertical stacking, vertical placement, overlapping. This is a way to create a sense of depth, but it's rather flat. Okay, it's a flattened picture plane. It doesn't really have this. You don't get the sense that you could walk into this picture. Okay, and that's done for specific reasons, and we'll talk about those reasons when we get there. Now, form is how an object is done in space. It's a three-dimensional object. Okay, so form, objects that have form exist in 3 dimensions. So my water bottle here exists in 3 dimensions. versus a drawing of a water bottle, which exists in 2 dimensions. Okay, so volume versus shape. Okay, form is a 3-dimensional shape. So, for example, this sculpture here would have a 3-dimensional shape. This sculpture here would have a 3-dimensional shape. All right, you can walk around it, and it's going to look different as you interact with it, as you move around that object. Okay. Now, as far as sculptures, then, so sculptures are going to have form, but they're also going to be 2 different kinds of sculpture. There is a round and a relief. Okay, a round sculpture, a sculpture in the round, does this, where you can walk around the sculpture and it's going to change. You can see it from all sides. A relief sculpture you can only see from, it sticks out a little bit from the surface, but it's attached. You can't walk around it and see these figures from the back because there is no back. They're just carved and they're still attached to that stone. Does that make sense? So this is a relief and this is a round sculpture. Now composition is what you get when you take line, shape, color, value, texture, form, space, and all of the elements, and you arrange them, and you purposefully use them to create your work of art. Okay? Now, not every piece is going to use every element in equal measure. Okay? So again, those implied lines. There's different ways to create a work of art. There's the rule of thirds, and if you've taken a photography class, then you've probably heard of this before, where you move the focal point, the most important thing, over into, instead of putting it dead center, you're going to scooch it over to the side and up or down a third, and that makes your composition a little more interesting. Okay. Asymmetrical balance, again, gives us, gives us this feeling of instability. It gives us a dynamic feeling. So while he's using blue, while he's using line, while he's using, the color, while he's using texture, while he's using a very shallow space, okay, he's also arranging those objects to give us this asymmetrical balance so it feels unstable. Okay? Asymmetrical gives us this unstable feeling, which makes it more exciting. A symmetrical balance, 1 = 1 on either side, gives us a feeling of like, it feels like calm, it feels good, it feels stable, which is pleasing to our eye. It can be a little boring, as opposed to something like this, if it's used too much. All right. Now, vertical emphasis is when a piece has you doing this, like looking at it like up and down. Okay. This again is a little more dramatic, versus this horizontal emphasis, which has your eyes going like this, and that makes it feels a little more stable. Okay. Now, I want you to take a look at this piece. Now, this is by Carl Bloch, and you may or may not have seen this before. But what this picture does, I want you to jot down. I want you to just examine this picture for a second. How does this picture use color? How does this picture break down and use line? How does it use texture? How does it use shape? How does it use value? How does it use space? Okay. And the goal is, you can tell what he wants you to take a look at is right here. Okay. Now this picture, I use this picture because it's such a good composition, because he uses all of these things in equal measure. He's got the value, the high value up top versus and this line right here of low value. And Jesus sits right in the middle. He uses implied lines where everyone, with the exception of a few figures, are looking up at him. And so all he uses shape by creating these triangles, and Jesus kind of sits like 2/3 of the way up this triangle. But then there's other triangles that are created also, and Jesus always sits, either his face or his hand sit at the apex of those different triangles. If you go through here, there's like some 30 some odd triangles that can be made with this piece. It's really good compositional study. You get color. When you look at all the colors throughout, there's just little pops of intense vibrancy throughout. There's little pops of color, but really the strongest colors, most of them are these earthy colors, subdued greens, blues. They've all got kind of this brownish tinge to them. But Jesus has this he's this big swath of red and blue, and that's to make him stand out. Texture, you've got the smoothness of the sky versus the roughness of the rock, and Jesus kind of sits at the confluence of the two. You're getting aerial perspective, where the things as they recede into the background get lighter. You're getting linear perspective, things in the background are getting smaller. Okay, that's all to lead your eye right here. Now, this picture of Jesus by Jose Clemente Orozco, he's a Mexican artist. He uses these things, but he uses them very, very differently. Okay? How does he use it differently? How does he use it the same? Just wanted you to take a look at this picture here. Okay, he's not using realistic colors, but is he using shape? Sure is. Is he using line? Makes you wind up here. Sure is. Is he using value? You betcha. Look at the lights versus the darks. Okay. Is he using texture? You bet. All of the busyness, the busy texture of this versus the smoothness of this. Okay. Same idea leads you up here. Is the sense of space realistic? No. Does that detract somewhat from what he's doing? No, I think it actually helps it. Okay. The warms versus the cool colors. So good. So you can see how these two pictures are very, very, very different, but they're serving the same purpose. So again, those basic building blocks help create every single art work. Okay? This is form. We're going to be looking at every work of art with these lenses. So we're going to be asking ourselves, how does the artist use color? How does the artist use shape, value, texture, form, space, value? Okay? So for all of these things. So you need to know these elements: form, space, shape, value, texture, line.